Good afternoon. Welcome to this third session of the ETSI's Monastic Research Conference and Workshop. So we have a very exciting panel, a group of amazing panelists, and I'm sure you all are eager to hear from them. The structure of the panel is we'll have first the two main speakers who will speak, and then that's followed by the rest of the panel joining in the conversation. It's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Dean Barbara Krauthammer, who's going to give a keynote address on a critical need for well-being in education. Dean Krauthammer is widely recognized as a leading historian of African American slavery and emancipation in the United States. She is an award-winning author, and all of this you can read in the program, so I'm not going to repeat them here. She became Dean of Emory College and College of Arts and Sciences in July 2023. I heard that an important reason for her to choose Emory is Emory's close association with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And this touches me with a deep sense of appreciation. Of course, as a Tibetan and a student of His Holiness, anyone who respects and values His Holiness is a source of great joy for me. But more importantly, I rejoice in the fact that she has joined the Emory's leadership group. In the current world, we need leadership like her, who values compassion, courage, integrity, and creativity. Dean Krauthammer, it's a pleasure, and please take the mic.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I want to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to His Holiness the Dalai Lama for his vision that led to the creation of the ETSI and of Sea Learning. And I'm also very grateful for his generosity in receiving all of us and teaching us and answering our questions this morning. I also want to give my thanks to the Dalai Lama Trust, the Central Tibet Administration, the Templeton Foundation, my colleagues from Emory, our Tibetan colleagues, and most of all, to the monastic and Emory students and scholars who are here. It's really an honor to be with you and to learn from you. I spoke briefly 2 days ago about the power of education. Its power to expose us to new ideas, deepen our understanding of familiar concepts, and allow for new ways of thinking. In preparation for this gathering, I reflected on my own experiences as a student, a teacher, a scholar, and as an administrator and leader in higher education. And there are 2 points that occurred repeatedly to me. The first is that education for both the student and the teacher can often be a contradictory experience. It is on the one hand a shared experience in the form of sharing knowledge through discussions or rehearsals or working together in a lab, and through the process of students and teachers asking and answering each other's questions. At the same time, however, it's a deeply solitary experience. One's interest in the subject and any particular assignment, the ability to dedicate the time to reading or participating in hands-on work, such as practicing a musical instrument, rehearsing a performance, or conducting a lab experiment. The ability to focus and concentrate on the material in ways that allow one to absorb and reflect on its significance and its relationship to other topics. The belief that the entire process of being a student has inherent value. All of these things are shaped by the individual, by internal and external factors that are largely personal. Students' senses of their identities, as well as the realities of their material circumstances, shape their learning. Students' personal goals, as well as pressures from family, shape their learning. And students' desires to belong to something larger than themselves, whether it's social groups, sports activities, hobbies, religious traditions, or other shared interests, can also shape how they approach and experience their learning. So in my time this afternoon, I want to address the issue of well-being and why it's critical that we focus on it from two perspectives, from supporting students and also supporting teachers, two parts of the same whole. First, student well-being. In the United States, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention describes well-being as the presence of positive emotions and moods, for example, contentment or happiness, the absence of negative emotions, such as depression or anxiety, satisfaction with life, fulfillment, and positive functioning. Generally, we think of well-being as a holistic concept, encompassing physical and mental health. Things such as balanced nutrition, exercise, sleep, and appropriate hygiene, as well as access to medical care, all support students' well-being. The CDC and many public health professionals and mental health experts maintain that well-being has a definitive emotional, physical, social, mental, and other aspects that affect students' experiences and contribute to positive outcomes in college and beyond. So a focus on college student well-being is critical right now to address the growing evidence of students' mental health distress. For the mental health crisis has been widely researched and documented the high rates of student distress. The American Psychological Association has said that mental health is at a crisis level. The 2023 Healthy Minds study, led by researchers at the University of Michigan, the University of California in Los Angeles, Boston University, and Wayne State University, surveyed 96,000 college students across the United States. Their findings showed that about 60% reported some mental health challenges, such as anxiety or depression. And of those students, nearly 70% of them reported that emotional stress affected their ability to pursue their academic work and their progress with their college education. Students defined emotional stress as overwhelming concerns about completing their coursework and doing well academically, as well as meeting their financial obligations and thinking about their future. A growing body of research has shown that students' mental health challenges pose considerable obstacles to their continued academic progress towards graduation. Well-being is the bedrock of student success and degree completion. But the statistics suggest that too many students do not enjoy a level of well-being that enables them to flourish in an academic environment. This is something we've seen directly at Emory, with many of our students taking leaves of absence due to overwhelming stress, and these leaves then delay the student's ability to complete their degree requirements on schedule and extends their time to graduation. So promoting well-being to address academic issues requires a holistic approach because students' lives do not begin and end when they enter and leave the classroom. It's important to support student well-being, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Emory. By gaining an understanding of their own ability to regulate their emotions, identify the things that trigger stress and loneliness, and also by developing strategies to interrupt the physical and emotional stress response, students can acquire the knowledge and skills that promote well-being, and this helps them then become the architects of their own success, as well as enabling them to contribute to a community that fosters the well-being of others. At Emory, we have a class we call ECS 101. This course for all Emory College first-year students has been redesigned to emphasize student flourishing through community building, health and well-being, purposeful reflection, and finding pathways towards personal, academic, co-curricular, and extracurricular goals, providing students an introduction that sets the stage for their success in college and beyond. Another thing we're doing that researchers have said is important for promoting well-being is evaluating the policies and procedures so that we focus more on the student experience. Do students know who to contact for help? Is it easy for them to find the information or the forms that they need? Do they understand the process they have to follow? It's important for us to recognize that there's no single way of promoting well-being for all students. It's critical that we have awareness of and resources for different populations and different issues. For example, those who are the first generation in their families to go to college. Students who are African American and from other racial minority groups. Students who have learning disabilities and are neurodiverse. Students from the LGBTQ population all have distinct needs to support their well-being. And it's important for understanding the sources of stress that might cause students to feel overwhelmed, disconnected, underprepared, or that they don't belong in college. I want to talk a bit about the faculty and acknowledge my Emory faculty colleagues and all of the teachers who are with us today. I am not talking about you. Too often, faculty do not fully appreciate the realities of the ways students experience stress, anxiety, and other mental health challenges. For example, faculty at Emory sometimes say to me things like, they navigated college without the supports and resources that today's students have and say that they need. Faculty sometimes seem to imagine a golden age or glorious past when things were better, when students were more resilient and more focused, when students did not need accommodations for neurodiverse conditions. They imagine a time when everything was better. Too often, faculty simply expect, either consciously or not, that today's students should have the same college experience as their faculty, some of whom attended college over 3 or 4 decades ago. Long before the internet and cell phones, long before society was witnessing the effects of the climate crisis in real time, when higher education was often beyond the reach of many women, many low-income students, and students from racial and ethnic minority groups. There was no golden age of college in the past. And criticizing today's students for not being independent or resilient enough isn't productive. Instead, as I've emphasized to the faculty at Emory, we should be reaching out to our students with compassion. They are learning, as we all are, how to live in our present-day world. I had the opportunity to speak with one of the C-learning teachers from Rajasthan on Wednesday, and she described to me how approaching her students and their parents with compassion allowed her to better understand the family's concerns and to allow her to find appropriate and satisfactory solutions for the student and the family and the teacher. Many of our faculty at Emory are strongly connected to our students and are completely committed to our students' success. Faculty invest their time and energy in teaching and mentoring students with the goal of helping them succeed. However, faculty, like students, often don't have access to the information or the skills they need to promote well-being. It's important that we all foster a culture that promotes well-being as a shared value and a collective endeavor. Most faculty don't receive training to help them create student-oriented learning and research environments that can support diverse groups of students. Unfortunately, it's often true for the opposite to be true. The classroom or the lab can be sites in which students experience bias or exclusion, often on the basis of marginalized social identities. But faculty don't need to become trained mental health or student affairs professionals to promote well-being. Instead, they can employ strategies in the classroom that allow them to get to know their students and facilitate students' interactions so that they form connections with each other. Other strategies include emphasizing learning as a process, not an outcome, and a process that involves trial and error, whether conducting an experiment in the lab, learning a new piece of music, or writing a paper. Faculty can also be more encouraged to be more aware of students' individual circumstances, such as first generation, low income, or being a woman in science. Faculty can also be students themselves and engage in learning about the resources and the experts in colleges who can help students so that they can effectively describe them and refer students to them. In this regard, faculty, like students, can enhance their own well-being by developing a sense of compassion and connection with their students in a shared community that values everyone's well-being. This is an ongoing process for everyone, for us at Emory and for all of us. It's an ongoing process, but it's one that is critical not just for students, but for higher education. Illuminating shared values and a commitment to learning as a process of advancing knowledge and facilitating personal development. The major issues of our time, climate crisis, the resurgence of authoritarian governments, and wealth and health inequalities require thoughtful, educated, and compassionate individuals who can work collectively and intentionally to address these pressing challenges. I want to thank you, and I look forward to hearing from the conversation with my colleagues on the panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dean Krautheimer. There is so much in your talk that we need to unpack. Hopefully we will have time. And I hope that good questions will come from the audience and help us unpack some of those. Next, we have Dr. Robin Nuzlocke. I'm very happy happy that Professor Nuzlocke is here to present the scientific perspective on this topic. Dr. Nuzlocke is an associate professor of psychology at Northwestern University, where he directs the Effective and Clinical Neuroscience Laboratory. His research examines how the brain creates emotion and how these brain systems are implicated in health and well-being. So, the perfect person to be on this panel. He's interested in the convergence between science and Buddhism. That also makes him, his scholarship, his understanding so relevant to this panel. And he is the co-director of ETSI's research training program. Dr. Naslock has published over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles on the neuroscience of emotion and health, and has received numerous honors and awards, including the Rising Star Award from the Association for Psychological Science. It gives me such a joy to introduce you, Robin, who I see as a dear friend and an amazing colleague. So please.
Well, it is just such an honor to be here at I say it proudly, the first ever ETSI monastic-led research conference, and my heart was so warmed by seeing our monastic science colleagues on stage participating in this conversation. My name is Robin Nusslock. I'm a faculty member at Northwestern University in the United States, and as Sandula mentioned, my research uses the tools of human neuroscience to investigate how the brain creates emotion and how those brain systems are implicated in both mental and physical health. But the role in my life that I think brings me the most joy presently, and that I most cherish these days, is my role as a co-director of the ETSI research training program with my very dear collaborator, Professor Nicole Gerardo. And we're really at a historic point in time where we have conversations happening between Tibetan monastics and academic scientists to explore ancient questions of mind and matter in this collaborative way. And it's just an honor to be a part of this conversation. And so this is a picture of our winter research program that we had last winter. And we hold these programs every winter, and Professor Gerardo will go into more detail tomorrow. But I also want to pause and just give a deep bow of reverence to the ETSI team, and particularly Geshe-la, for his extraordinary leadership in carrying out the vision of His Holiness in the 100 Years Project of facilitating this collaboration. I was asked to discuss the concept of neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity involves the brain's ability to change in response to experience. So the idea here is that biology is not fixed, it's not static, it changes in response to experience. Neuroplasticity can be good in the sense that it can be about facilitating well-being and health. Neuroplasticity can be bad. We know that drugs create major neuroplastic changes in the brain that drive addiction. And so neuroplasticity is basically the brain's ability to change. And we have, as a world, received so much wisdom from the Lojong training tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist training tradition, His Holiness, and others on these extraordinary windows into mind and trainings of mind and maps of mind. And we see this really, and I see His Holiness as a leader in this initiative. Most of neuroscience in 1995 was focused, in my area of research, was focused on depression and anxiety and why people are feeling bad emotions. And since His Holiness really got involved in the conversations with neuroscientists, we now see the birth of the field of contemplative neuroscience. We see the focus of the neuroscience of well-being and the positive promotion of compassion. And we see this really deeply embodied in the center at Emory, led by Geshe-la, and C-Learning, CBCT, and Compassion Shift. If you look at the trajectories of research on meditation, it's really just taken off over the last 20, 25 years. This is a graph that presents the number of publications per year on the topic of meditation, and you can see that it's really become a very central topic in the field of neuroscientific research. My goal for today is to provide a roadmap of neuroplasticity and the effect of meditation as well as other types of positive behaviors on the brain, And I'm going to focus on 3 pillars of the emotional brain: the prefrontal cortex, which I'll go into. I'll go into each of these systems in more detail. The amygdala, the ventral striatum, and then one more brain region called the hippocampus, which we know is so critical for memory and so critical for aging. So let's start with the prefrontal cortex. Behind our forehead, we have this piece of tissue called the prefrontal cortex. The frontal cortex does many things. It is involved in memory, it's involved in attention. In the context of this talk, I'll focus on its role in emotion regulation, which is the ability of the brain to engage attention and thinking and cognitive processes to manage one's emotions, one's physical health, and one's mental health. And this system is a highly evolved system that can time travel into the future and time travel into the past. And it's an amazing system when it's operating well, but it's also a source of real suffering when it's not operating well. And there's been growing evidence to suggest that engaging in meditation actually alters both the function and structure of the meditation in meaningful ways. This is work from Judson Brewer's team at Brown University, in which they looked at the functional connectivity in an area of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex among individuals who are long-term meditators. And they found meaningful changes in the functional connections of this area of the brain that were associated with positive emotion and well-being. And this has been nicely replicated by David Cresswell at Carnegie Mellon University, again, showing that among long-term meditators, you see these functional and structural changes in the prefrontal cortex. One of the themes of my comments, though, is that you don't need to be a long-term meditator to see neuroplastic changes, and that'll come out through all my comments. So why do we care about prefrontal functional connectivity? Well, it's well established that people who are suffering from depression and anxiety have deficits or struggle with prefrontal connections in ways that can cause hurtful feelings, difficulties in emotion regulation, and suffering. And so changing this area of the brain isn't just about kind of exploring neuroplasticity for the sake of it. We suggest it has positive effects for people's emotional and physical health. And if you look at the ingredients of CBCT, the cognitive reframing component of CBCT is a perfect target for a perfect method for really addressing these prefrontal processes. And Geshe-La's really, his program is really perfectly positioned to facilitate these prefrontal changes. Another area of the brain. So if the prefrontal cortex is right behind our foreheads, in addition to this, another area that I'd like to focus on in the emotional brain is the amygdala. Now, many people have probably heard of the amygdala. When people think of the amygdala, what's one word that comes to mind when you think of the amygdala? Fear, anger, kind of negative emotions. I'd say a more up-to-date perspective on the amygdala is it's a salient center. It's kind of an alarm bell in your brain. And positive stimuli and negative stimuli can be salient. But there's this bias in the amygdala towards more negative stimuli. And we know that individuals who suffer from depression and anxiety, the topics that Dean Krautheimer talked about so eloquently, have differences, both functionally and structurally, in the amygdala that can generate high levels of distress and anxiety. There's been some very interesting research showing that individuals who engage in long-term meditation practices actually show reduced amygdala activity to negative stimuli in their environment, showing again that the act of practicing meditation and mindfulness, in this case over time, actually reduces reactivity in the amygdala to negative stimuli. And this figure that you can see on the horizontal axis plots the amount of time in a person's life with which they've practiced meditation, and on the vertical axis is amygdala activity, and it's a good endorsement of neuroplasticity. The more effort a person puts in, the more kind of a lower response to threatening stimuli that they get. Interestingly, in this study, they also found that individuals who were long-term meditators showed reduced amygdala activity to positive stimuli as well. And that kind of speaks to a lot of what I've learned from you all, wonderful monastics, about how deepening your practice is not just about seeking highs or avoiding lows. It's about generating a sense of equanimity, and you can see that in these data. And Geshe-La was on a study that also showed something very similar here. This is a map of the connections between the amygdala and the rest of the brain. So I'm focusing on very specific areas of the brain, But in neuroscience these days, we've moved away from just viewing the brain as a set of individual regions to really as a communication machine. And I'm showing you this figure because it's recognized that if you change one area of the brain, you're going to change essentially every other area of the brain, including connections between the amygdala and the visual cortex. So it literally can affect the world, the way with which you see and perceive the world. And again, we know that lower amygdala activity is associated with less depression and anxiety. So these techniques that help people manage their amygdalas and threat sensitivities and threat circuitries might actually help manage people's sufferings in meaningful ways. And again, I turn to the foundational trainings in CBCT as really great practices for stabilizing these brain systems. Another area of the brain that you may not have heard much is this area of the brain called the ventral striatum. So if the amygdala is the brake pad to the brain, and it's kind of associated with threat processing and salience processing and more kind of freezing and anxiety, you could think of the ventral striatum as really kind of a reward region. It's a pleasure region. It's a motivator region. And there's growing evidence to suggest that this region of the brain is also increased among people who report high levels of well-being and life satisfaction. And there's growing evidence in the contemplative tradition that high levels of activity in this area of the brain is actually associated with high levels of compassion, which makes me think of the Tibetan term sewa, loving kindness, warm-heartedness, etc. Now, I'm not reducing the complexity of sewa to one area of the brain, but this is an area of the brain that clearly is about action, compassion, motivation, and positive pursuits. It's also an area of the brain that can be really hijacked in various forms of addiction. So it highlights the fact that how you use your brain really depends on how you're kind of applying techniques and behaviors. There's a wonderful study that came out of Richie Davidson's group at Madison that showed that just going through a 2-week compassion training program versus a reappraisal program actually increased ventral striatal activation. Just 2 weeks of training. It wasn't a large training program, 2 weeks of training. And that this change was driven in part through changes in the prefrontal cortex, highlighting the connections between more analytic areas of the brain and more emotive areas of the brain associated with positive well-being. And I'll return to that later today as well in my talk on emotion and ethics. This is the area of the brain that probably is most distinctly reduced in depression. A major focus of my research program is examining this area of the brain and neurotransmission systems in depression. And this area of the brain is really the hub of depression in the brain. So again, I'm highlighting by helping people change their ventral striatal activity, their positive emotions, there is a clear path of reducing suffering. And the loving kindness component of CBCT is a perfect pathway for helping to facilitate this particular practice. I also want to highlight the fact that the brain is embodied in a body. And these practices of mindfulness and compassion training not only affect our brains and our mental health, but have meaningful effects on our physical health. There are well-established neuronal pathways that descend from the brain to the body. This is primarily driven by what's called the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system descends from the brain into the body and connects to, check 1, check 2, descends from the brain into the body and connects to these organ systems, the heart, the lungs, the gut, and actually goes into the bone marrow and releases chemicals onto the bone marrow in ways that can generate increased inflammation in the body. And so increased inflammation is really good in the short term. But in the long term, increased inflammation is the soil or the foundation for which cardiometabolic health problems can develop and other various serious physical health problems. Very nice study out of Emory University showing that individuals going through a compassion training program not only had positive effects in their brain, but had reduced inflammation as measured in the blood. Again, and the mechanisms through which this is established are very well established in the sense that by reducing stress physiology in the brain, you can reduce stress physiology in the body. And other research has actually shown that this is in part driven by changes in gene expression profiles that can actually have salubrious effects on the body. In addition to discussing the emotional brain, I want to pause briefly and talk about the area of the brain involved in memory. So the hippocampus is an area of the brain that we think of as really the first line where memories are consolidated, in the brain. It's not where memories are stored long term, it's where memories are consolidated before they're transferred to long-term memory. There's probably no area of the brain that's more affected by experience than this particular area of the brain, the hippocampus, because by default, it's the bridge between the world and your own biology. If I had given this talk in 1995, I would have said you never grow new brain cells. You're born with a certain number of brain cells, and that's it, and those brain cells die over the course of your life. We now know through well-established research that we do grow new brain cells, and we grow them particularly in the hippocampus in a few thousand per day. And this has major implications for Alzheimer's because actually the hippocampus is the place where many Alzheimer's-based symptoms first emerge, this medial temporal lobe. There's research showing that going through just an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program has meaningful changes or drives meaningful changes in hippocampal volume. 8 weeks, not a lifetime of practice. You can see neuroplastic changes very fast, although it's also important to recognize that there's some studies that have not found structural differences. So we have a lot of work to do to understand why some studies do and why some studies don't find structural differences. In addition to meditation and mindfulness, there's well-established research that social relationships are major drivers of positive neuroplastic changes in the brain. Indeed, the single greatest predictor of early mortality, according to the World Health Organization, is social isolation. And so social isolation has been shown to have positive effects on the brain. Exercise has been shown to actually induce neurogenesis in the hippocampus. And wonderful research on superagers, which is a project at Northwestern and Harvard University where they're looking at why certain individuals don't have memory reductions over the course of their life, suggests that curiosity across the lifespan actually facilitates increased neurogenesis and increases positive learning. So in closing, what I'd like to say is there's growing evidence that biology is not fixed, that well-being is a skill, that you can enhance neuroplastic and physiological plastic changes in your body through well-established behaviors, that meditation and lifestyle affect the brain and body. It's also important to emphasize, though, that there was a wonderful reference this morning in the prior talk by Geshe-la about gross versus subtle mind. I'm talking primarily about the gross mind here. But I would argue that even if you're changing the gross mind, you're having very positive effects on life outcomes and reducing suffering. The last thing I want to say is that I would publicly say, any chance I get, that science needs Buddhism more than Buddhism needs science. We have amazing technologies in science. We have the ability to alter genes in living tissue. We have the ability to modulate brain function and structure in real time. We need a North Star of compassion. The compassion of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is a wonderful North Star to guide science. And also, I'm so excited about the future collaborations we have with all of you. These are the posters that you'll be seeing at the poster session, where our collaboration can guide us in directions where we never thought we would go in terms of asking questions that we never thought. So we're so excited about this collaboration. And I just want to thank you for hosting this wonderful session, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Robin. You gave me a lot of hope, but I also have to do exercise. So now I would like to invite the panelists into the conversation. I will pose some prepared questions, and then I'll open the floor to the audience. My first question will be to Geshe-la, and as such, I will give a brief introduction of the panelists as I pose these questions. So, as you all know, Geshe-la is the co-founder and executive director of the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics at Emory University, also known as Emory's Compassion Center. Geshe-la is a teaching professor in the Department of Religion. He's also the founder and spiritual director of Tepung Losning Monastery. Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Over the past 2 decades, Geshe-la has been a pioneer of compassion training programs for adults and children and has contributed to the development of the burgeoning compassion science through his research initiatives and collaborations. And there's so much, accomplishments that are associated with Geshe-la, and Emory University just recently, recognized Geshe-la's efforts by, awarding him the Thomas Jefferson Award, which is the highest honor that Emory University bestows to its teaching professors, or teaching staff, and its administrative staffs. So my question to you, Geshe-la, so I have a lot of notes here, so I have to navigate. So this morning, at the audience, an Emory student asked His Holiness about this generation suffering from chronic sense of hopelessness and ways to keep our hopes alive. His Holiness talked about maintaining realistic expectations and attuning to the realities of life and learning to regulate, these emotions oneself. I feel like he provided us with the essentials, all the, crucial elements of mind training in a very short answer. However, I would like to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit, and also talk about the 2 programs at the center that are focused on cultivating well-being through Lojong practice.
Thank you, Sandila, and thank you for such an incredible talk on neuroplasticity, Dr. Rapin and Naslock, and Dean Hammer, your diagnosis of what the student population is facing today. It's really incredible. I think let me begin by this. Actually, a few years ago, I was at a conference, and where Richard Davidson, one of the foremost researchers in the field of contemplative science, he said that in the neuroscience, in the last 60, 70 years, there have been, for him, 2 most significant discoveries. Number 1 in the neuroscience was the neuroplasticity, this capacity of brain to change in response to experience. And the second one had to do with the training the mind. You can train the mind through practice, which basically is a meditation. So I think when we talk about various struggles that we are having today, particularly young generation, the question about hopelessness, the chronic sense of hopelessness in today's world, it is really a prevalent one. I mean, that's what's driving so many of the mental health issues. Even the suicide, what the education officer the other day mentioned, even someone who was the topper on the national level of exams, but then ending up committing suicide, and that itself reflects a certain underlying mental health issues, and that's why that he was absolutely right that what we need is the way, the tools and the ways to enhance our sense of well-being, how can see the world that we live in a more positive and healthy way, instead of this negativity bias that we have. How can we change that? And in that sense, I think that the training of the mind is really important. So His Holiness's remarks this morning, I thought that it was really, really poignant, in the sense that when he said that to some extent, it has to do with our expectations. How do we see our world around us, but also our own achievement and so forth? This unrealistic expectation is something that is affecting many of our lives in modern society. This achievement-driven kind of society that we are. And the reality is such, as His Holiness mentioned, that we are ordinary beings. The adversities, the failures and shortcomings are inevitable. And in that sense, how do we train ourselves to accept and embrace our human condition? That we don't need to be perfect, but at the same time, to see the strength that each one of us has, despite our human limitations and imperfections. And I think that's a really, really important part. Secondly, when His Holiness mentioned about the connection, the sense of isolation is simply the breaking down of that sense of connection. It's a subjective experience, and I think that when we think about, the compassion, sense of belonging, these are all have to do with how do we connect to each other, a sense of social connectivity. So research is strong, in pointing to the fact that the sense of social connectivity is highly correlated with better health conditions. The lack of social connectivity correlates with poor health. And in the Lojong training, or the Lamdim, the contemplative practices in the Indo-Tibetan Buddhist tradition, I would say that this is true in all spiritual traditions, but particularly in the Indo-Tibetan spiritual traditions that I'm aware of, we find very systematic ways of building that sense of connection and expanding that and deepening it. The compassion training really is about how to build that meaningful connection with each other. And there are ways to do that by making visible our shared human condition, where we can bring others into our in-group by identifying with them with this human condition, and deepen the sense of connection or the tenderness that comes from awareness of our common humanity or shared human condition by seeing our interdependence, how we depend on others, those around us, but gradually, that even those far away physically from us, but in this infinitely, connected world, that how our own interest, our own comforts, all our own resources or the needs, that they actually come from infinite number of other beings. It's about really training. If we train our mind and hearts to attune to those realities, the training, that's why Rishi Davidson's point that the mind can be trained, in whether it's seeing our common humanity and the connections. And through that, you can see that how that can change our brain, and that this can lead to a greater sense of connection, and perhaps in many ways that can help deal with the modern day epidemic of loneliness, isolation, and so forth. So the last question about what we are doing at Emory. We do have an umbrella initiative called the Compassion Shift. We haven't yet fully launched, but it is an attempt to bring compassion in our world. In a way that we pursue this kind of long-term goal to advance the global, culture of compassion by bringing these teachings, practices, tools in education all the way through K through 12, through C-learning, and for the adult population through the CPCT, cognitively based compassion training. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I, I'm so excited, but it doesn't usually show on my face, my emotions. But I'm feeling that because I just had a aha moment, a realization that the answer that His Holiness gave this morning, contains both, the idea about misconceptions, ignorance, to use Buddhist lingua, as a root for all the suffering. Because when we have unrealistic expectations, we are exaggerating, we are misconceiving, and that seems to be at the root of that. The suffering. And another, just Keshla mentioned about the connection, right? Connection fosters compassion. And with these two, I think, discerning, and His Holiness emphasized so much this morning about critical thinking, right? Using our intelligence, using our reasoning, not just relying on authority, on faith, devotion. I think this contains the two main ingredients to cultivate our well-being. Anyway, I will move, and next question is for Mark, and I have. So Mark is an associate professor of full professor. So my information is. So even in the AI time, I'm using the unpaid, unsubscribed chat GPT. So the information. Okay, Mark is a full professor of philosophy at Emory University and an award-winning teacher. He has authored numerous works, including Woodcutters and Witchcraft. I really like this title, right? But the book that I'm really excited about is the one that he co-authored with Professor David Henderson, who's sitting there, entitled The Dharma of Science, a Philosophy of Science for Buddhist Scholars. It is an ETSI publication, a philosophy of science introductory book, specifically written for the ETSI science program. And in this book, David and Mark have used their more than a decade-long experiences teaching philosophy of science to Buddhist monks and nuns. Mark has been a core member of the ETSI's faculty leader team since the program's inception in 2006. And that makes him one of my favorite people. And at the same time, there are several favorite people here. David, Carol Worthman, Ari, right? So these are all, have been associated with ETSI right from the beginning. We're so thankful. And the, performance that we see today are all because of your efforts. So thank you so much. So my question, where is it? Yeah. Okay. So from Dean's talk, right, and Robin's presentation, it's clear that the concept or the idea of well-being is a very complicated, very complex issue with so many parts, with so many components. Many things that we have to consider when thinking about well-being. So my question is, how has Western philosophy, sort of addressed this complicated problem of promoting well-being? What is the history of, approaches, strategies, trainings, that Western philosophy and philosophers have employed in fostering well-being?
Thank you, Sunda. It's been a real honor to be part of this program, and it's such a pleasure to see how it's thrived and developed. So the history of philosophical thought about well-being is at least 2,000 years old, so I think it's going to take a little time to get through it. So I'll just fast forward. I'll mention Aristotle, who you're going to talk about. He said some things about well-being. Roll the tape, and yeah, I'll talk about the 20th century approaches. Well-being is complicated, and if you think across disciplines, there's some very different ways of thinking about well-being. Dr. Kruthammer mentioned two key components of well-being. One is well-being as a kind of, she used the word value, and I think it's appropriate, an aspiration. This is what we're aiming for. But then what is it that we're aiming for? She cited the CDC criteria, which emphasize the psychological dimension of well-being. So it's positive emotions, absence of negative emotions. And that's very important. And there's a large literature in psychology about how causes and conditions that facilitate that. And clearly that's a lot of what's getting picked up in the kinds of studies that Robin's pointing to, is the things that might help us regulate those things. But there's at least one more dimension that philosophers, and in this case I'm thinking of economists and anthropologists, they're thinking about well-being not so much as an internal state, but as a relational state. And I think here the key philosopher is Amartya Sen, the great Indian Nobel Prize-winning economist and philosopher. And Amartya Sen emphasized that the way in which well-being depends not only on me, but on the kind of physical too, but he's emphasizing the social environment that I'm in. That as the environment's giving me certain kinds of opportunities, and then fostering my ability to develop certain kinds of capacities. And if I'm in an environment that just doesn't allow me to develop those capacities, my possibilities for well-being are quite stunted, even if, right, at the moment I feel kind of pretty good about myself, right? So this more relational side and the psychological side work together, and they're related in a very dynamic relationship, but they're not the same thing. So I think a number of the things we've seen in the talks today, I'm just going to highlight little pieces that I saw pointing towards this more relational, external relationship to the social structures, the institutions that we live in. I think about, you mentioned equanimity, and having worked with the monks now for quite a long time, such remarkable people, and it's often struck me, or I've often had the thought, this is not just about their training as individuals. This is, and I don't know how, I haven't had the time to be an anthropologist, and although I'd love to do this, live in the monastery and think about how the institutional structure, the social structure that they inhabit, facilitates the growth of certain sorts of capacities. And no doubt, setting aside time for things like meditation, right, is one of those things, and also having a very deep and very articulate account of what meditation is like, what it's doing, the whole Lojong tradition, is outside of the mind. It's not part of your brain. It's in a bunch of books in a library, and it's crucial to the Tibetan tradition that those libraries have been preserved. Without that, these kinds of opportunities wouldn't even exist, right? So that's an important part of what I think has made Tibetan Buddhism in this form really produce very remarkable people. But we do the same kinds of things, and so I think the C Learning, one way of seeing what the C Learning project is doing, is not just changing the individuals, it's actually changing the pedagogy, changing the emotional, the structure of the educational system so that there is room for emotional growth, right? And so it's that outside part that's crucial to get the inside part going. And then things like ECS 101 and other kinds of things that universities can do are doing exactly the same sort of things. I mean, it's often struck me about our students at Emory, wonderful, beautiful, really strong, really smart, and they've spent their life up to the point where they get to Emory running really hard because they're in a social structural system that says, you better work all day long, every day. And one of the things we've done in my corner of the university, the Institute for the Liberal Arts, is try to create some spaces where people can take a pause and draw some connections, breathe a little bit, do in a structural way what the hippocampus does, and that is bring together the things that are significant and figure out what's significant in the education that you're getting, and then use that to go forward. So I think there's a number of things we can do that in our institutions, and I just want to emphasize this because if we think only about what are we going to do to the individual, what are they going to do to better themselves, we're missing the things that are giving them exactly the opportunities that either hinder them or enhance them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. When you were talking about that social structure that pushes students a lot, that you have to work all day, every day, I was in fact looking at my daughter. I don't know whether she has heard that, but then you also talked about keeping pauses. Yeah. Yes. But I really resonate with your comment about creating culture, right? And I see learning effort as such, creating a new culture. For instance, in Colombia, right, there's so much history of violence. Students or children from a very young age were exposed to these violence, and at the same time, the culture didn't have culture has this idea or value of machismo sort of thing, right? That men are not supposed to display, their emotion, the compassion, and so on. And ever since e-learning has, started in Colombia at this school, I kind of see some changes, right? And I am optimistic about, this being the first phase of this cultural shift that is happening. So thank you so much for sharing that. My next question is to Anichana La. Anichana La is a Tenzin Gyatso scholar and also an ETSI monastic science leader at her nunnery, Changjuk Chueling. She has been studying Buddhist philosophy for more than 2 decades. In 2017, she was selected for the prestigious 2-year full scholarship for monastics to study science at Emory University. And in 2022, she participated in a research internship program at Northwestern University with Robin at his lab, which is an academic collaboration between Emory University and Northwestern University that allows monastics to delve into the intricate realms of human emotions, neuroanatomy, and research methodologies. Anichana is also actively involved in supporting her nunnery through educational initiatives and the larger Tibetan settlement through the Reimagining Deguling project, where she sits as a member of the committee. It's so satisfying to see these young scholars participating in conferences like this, sharing their insights, their knowledge, their understanding. They grew up in a structure that allowed many of these values to kind of naturally grow. And His Holiness therefore calls Tibetan culture a compassion, culture, a culture of compassion. And for a long time, I kind of struggled with that, right? I know that superficially, we would often, say expressions that show compassion, but, often I'm pessimistic about whether that compassion is genuine or how, but, through the observations that you were making, it seems that compassion culture is, firmly sort of established, and that it is influencing our growth. So my question, Anichana, for you is, how would you understand the implications of neuroplasticity, right? This change happening. What does neuroplasticity mean for you as a student of Buddhism and as a practitioner of Buddha's teachings? Does learning about neuroplasticity help you in any way, right? So multi-pronged questions, but you can,
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, I would like to say thank you to Dr. Robin Naslok, especially, from 2019, I can say, he really taught us about specifically about neuroscience. So, yeah, and when it comes to the neuroplasticity, the meaning Dr. Robin Naslok already mentioned, the ability to change. So, for as a Buddhist monastic student, it's not that much like so different things, when we usually talk about how things change. It's impermanent. So it's for us it's a like normal meaning, but it's when it comes to the related with the Dharma and how we collaborate with science and Buddhism, and then it gives us more requirement to research more on the Buddhist topic. Right now, Dr. Robin Noslock showed some of the data and finding. Most are studied on mindfulness and compassion, kindness. But there are so much more we have to study, like Sixth Perfection and Eightfold Noble Path and Four Noble Truth. How each of them can change neuron or the brain part. So for this, I think for this purpose, ETSI trained us. I think I use this one. Yes. Hello. I think it's okay. So, if I'm not wrong, for this, fulfilling this purpose, I think ETSI trained us, to be a Westerner researcher or monastic researcher. So we have, in this research group, we have 8 groups, but I'm hoping, in the future, there are like thousands of research groups will come up. And then when it comes to the, how it's related with the well-being, when it comes to the well-being, I myself, even I am a Buddhist student or like being born a Buddhist family, but when I first came to India, I was 19 years old. I never been to a teaching, Buddhist teaching in Tibet. And then when I first got teaching from His Holiness, it was in 2003. At that time, he was teaching the Bodhisattva way of life. And then from the beginning, His Holiness was advising us meditate on emptiness and compassion. I got the question how to meditate on emptiness. And then I just, whenever I met some monks, I was asking how to meditate on emptiness. But it was, so I was 19. There's no background of Buddhism at all. We were doing like the rituals, go to the temple and offering, but there's no knowledge or background. So when teacher explained us, the very high level, it's hard to understand how to meditate. So from this, I found in terms of developing the well-being, the teacher really needs skillful method. So this, after then, when I was studying, I investigate or I clearly think about how Buddha teach to the student. And then there's 3 ways of teaching. When it's come to the question why Buddha give 3 ways teaching, the answer is because the student has different ability. In terms of like student mental or like way of thinking or disposition is among the student is different, then Buddha turned the 3 different teaching. And not only that, that's like sometimes, there's some teaching that totally don't agree at a higher tenet. So those are, Buddha taught those teaching not because of ignorance, teach them because of skillful, what is helpful to the student. So I'm so honored or so lucky to thank to the ETSI how they created the sea learning curriculum. I myself attend one time to sea learning workshop in Devon. So they taught, how to use method to teach the method which exists in Buddhism, in Nalanda tradition, where in how to approach those very easy, in an easy way, in a capable way to the children and the different ages. So I really appreciate to the Geshe-la and all of the faculty who are working on the sea learning. And then if I'm not wrong, we are the research at the backbone of the sea learning workshop. So that's why when it comes to the well-being, the skillfulness is so important, especially for the teacher. Teacher needs more skill. And in the Buddhism, we have usually listed like 10 perfection. So the one perfection is, I am not sure whether the translate is right or not, but skillful perfection. So skillful perfection, example with a teacher. So teacher will be like skillful. So that's why we need, in terms of developing the well-being, each and everyone who have the responsibility to develop the well-being, we really should need to improve our skill to teach. So this is one thing I'm concerning. And then when it comes to the well-being, one thing I would like to say is through my experience, it can be wrong, but I'm not sure. Sometimes we are focusing too much what other people is thinking at you instead of thinking who you are really and what you are really doing. And so if we can focus more to yourself, what kind of action you are taking day by day, and what kind of responsibility do you really have, and are you really following to fulfill your responsibility? I think it can help to get a less suffering, less suffering. So many of the suffering, what I'm usually saying is unnecessary suffering. People have so many suffering that are really unnecessary. Worrying and exaggerating and doubting. So that's I would like to share. And then, so finally we have more to research on all of the, all of the method which listed in Buddhism, in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anichang La. I think your point about the Buddha's turning of the three wheels of Dharma and the idea about skillfulness, it ties really well with what Dean Krauthammer earlier talked about, different approaches that are needed to cultivate well-being, that there is no single way, right? There's no panacea, right? So skillful mean, I think is needed both by the faculty and the students, both by us and you and everyone, I think. So thank you so much. We have about maybe 9 minutes, so I will open up for questions from the audience, if there are. And when you ask question, please say your name and where you are from, and to whom you are directing the question. Any? Yeah, Carol.
Hi, thank you for that. I'm just saying something so that all the other people we really want to hear from will be coming up with some questions. So think of good questions, people, okay? Please, please. But I'm thinking that I'm loving everything you guys are saying, particularly appreciating this point about skillful means, because there are many people who use today skillful means to destroy, skillful means to instill fear, and to drive society in ways that are truly destructive. And so I think it can also be an important aspect as we develop this science and Buddhism dimension to really flesh that out a bit, that not all of us can be equally skillful in all ways, but what are the various varieties of skillfulness that can be truly effective? And as you were saying, the Buddha did exactly that. And that sometimes things that would seem silly or unproductive in another context would be exactly what is needed. So anything you have to say about skillfulness, any of you?
Thank you, Dr. Wortman, for this question. I think the skillful means, it's not, to me, as a Buddhist, when we see tapke, it's not simply being sort of creative, manipulative, or figuring out how to convey whatever you like to convey, But rather, skillful means in the Buddhist tradition is grounded in compassion. It's grounded in the good heart. This reminds me of what His Holiness advised our students at Emory in 1998 at the graduation. He said that education, those graduating students, he said that you have spent 4 years here, now you are graduating with the knowledge. In engineering or in the medicine or physics, different technical, knowledge fields. He said that, but the knowledge is a tool. How you use that tool, whether constructively or destructively, depends on the user. If the person is coming from a warm-heartedness, a compassionate heart, then the tools you have, you would use towards good purpose. If otherwise, very tools that we have, including the sophisticated way of getting others to do what you want to do. That you can use that to manipulate. That, as they said, that it's like the psychopaths are very, very smart. They know exactly how to manipulate their victims. That they can take the perspective of the others. This cognitive empathy that they could have. But if it is not something that they are, concerned about them, if that comes from the selfishness and the, self-centeredness, then that very kind of capacity can be used for destructive purpose. So I would say that, I agree with you that how the capacity to convey the message, that needs to be. We need to distinguish some can be manipulative, some can be positive. But tapke in Tibetan, like one of those perfections that Anila was talking about, the 10 perfections. That is, of course, it's grounded in compassion.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, my name is Tenzi Palmo, and I'm from Tibetan Homes Foundation, Missouri. So, my question is towards Dr. Barbara. And earlier you said that education is a process, not an output. But these days, most of the universities and colleges admit students who have higher academic results, which causes students to focus more in output than in the process, leading to students facing stress, anxiety, etc. to reach their goals. They are not able to enjoy the learning process. So my question is, should the college focus on academic results? What are your opinions on this? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a perfect question, and I think that is the big question. And I think this is what I say, and my colleagues who are here and on the stage can tell you, this is what I say to the Emory faculty every time I meet with them, that excellence looks very different depending on who you're looking at, but that excellence is everywhere, that talent is everywhere, and part of our job as teachers, and now I'm going to think about being a skillful teacher, is being able to see that excellence in everybody and find ways to allow people to develop their excellence in the ways that make the most sense for them. It's an enormous task to imagine changing an entire institutional culture, but I think individually, one teacher at a time, one student at a time. My colleagues talked about the importance of social relationships, and I think starting those social relationships can have the effect of spreading that value of thinking about learning as a process and valuing that process. And that's something that I think for the health and well-being of our children, of our schools, of our communities, our families, our planet, we have to do that.
Hello, my name is Lozon Temba, and I came from Jibon Gomo Monastery. So my question is going to Dr. Robin. So my question is that always when we talk about our actions and everything, Buddhism believe behind there is consciousness. So, but in science stream, they think that also our brain functions, right? So Dr. Robin is many years I've been teaching us science. So that's why now I want to know he is personally thinking how he think there is behind our brain there has a consciousness or not. What is your personal decided? Thank you.
So 3:45 is when we're supposed to finish. So what I would say is that there's more. I'll quote Richard Feynman, the physicist, and where he says, "I'd rather have questions I can't answer than answers I can't question." And I think there's a dogma sometimes in science that we know everything in our methods, measure everything skillfully. And I would say I don't know. I think there's a lot of evidence that many aspects, maybe most aspects, possibly all aspects of consciousness are grounded in brain and body. But it would be presumptuous to say that that's a resolved question. And I've been deeply moved by the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism and humbled by Tibetan Buddhism to find myself much more frequently saying, I don't know. And that to me is a beautiful space because that's a place of inquiry and curiosity. And I'll reference it to Dean Krautheimer's comments too, which is that institutions are made of people. And to go to the wonderful question that was asked, the best thing we can do as students is stay curious. So my journey is one of curiosity at present, there's so much evidence that there are aspects of consciousness that are deeply grounded in the brain and body, and that's beautiful, and that aligns with Tibetan traditions. There's gross consciousness, there's subtle consciousness. But the nature of subtle consciousness, I don't know. And I look forward to working and collaborating with all of you for the rest of my life and exploring that question.
So thank you so much. I'll try to be a good facilitator and on time. So a huge round of applause for our panel here. Thank you. And tea break, and please come back at 4 o'clock. Thank you.
Hello, hello. You've been studying science for many years.
저런 거 뭐야? 저런 거야. 뭐자 그러다 너서 탱고래. 저런 거 파탱고래다. 뭐자 그러다. 그래. 선프루프가 나와야 되잖아. 야야.
레디였으면 그 레디였으면 나한테 놈지 인지 챙겨 말해. 응 그래. 챙겨.
Hello, can I invite the presenters and panelists on the stage? First, Yangde Rinpoche, And then Professor Robin Nashlock, and then Professor David Henderson, and Geshe Gele Gyazo.
In Tibetan, then you can use the okay? Yeah. Hello. Yeah, hello. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
I'm using this one. Yeah.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the fourth session. In this session, we are going to have two presentations, and after followed by a panel discussion. As a presenter, we have here Yangdi Rinpoche and Robin Nashlock, representing Buddhism and Science. The theme or the topic of the panel discussion is emotion and ethical behavior. So this topic is very relevant, I feel, to discuss here, because when we actually engage any kind of an activity or any kind of an action, it is very much shaped by the emotional status, and in most cases, when we are emotionally overwhelmed, we ended up doing unwanted things, something that regret us later, because of not able to make some kind of proper judgment, or not able to regulate the emotion at that point of time. And therefore, I think it is very important topic and theme to discuss. And at the same time, I feel it is very exciting, because we have two great scholars from the two different traditions. Yangdi Rinpoche representing Tibetan. He is the most well-known kind of Tibetan young scholar, and also Robin Nashlock, and presenting from the scientific perspective on the emotions and ethical behavior. I'm so much excited and enthusiastically waiting to hear their presentation, and I hope I'm sure this will entertain you all very well, and at the same time it will be very informative, and not only informative, but also we can gain so much practical instructions that we can use in our day-to-day life in terms of applying when we encounter some kind of unexpected tragedies, or some kind of distressful sort of stimulation or triggers. Therefore, without taking much time, first we have a presenter, Yangdi Rinpoche. I will do a brief introductions of the Yangdi Rinpoche, and then I will request Yangdi Rinpoche to give his presentation on the emotions and ethical behavior from Buddhist perspective. Yangdi Rinpoche, Lobsang Tembe Gyenseng, served as the secretary of Ganden Important Office, having recognized as the reincarnation of the previous Yangdi Rinpoche at the age of 10. He embarked on a journey of traditional Buddhist studies by leaving Tibet in 1990 to join Serame Monastery. In 2006, Yangdi Rinpoche achieved remarkable milestone with the completion of his academic studies and the rigorous 6-year Gilu examination, earning the prestigious Geshe Laramba degree. His commitment to learning extended to the realm of Tantra, where he spent 2 years study at Jude Tantric College, ultimately graduating in 2008 with a Geshe Laramba in Tantric degree. While studying at the Jude College, Yangdi Rinpoche took on the role of debate assistant to Kamaba, the esteemed head of the Kagyu lineage. His scholarship, practice, and dedication to the preserve of Tibetan Buddhism caught the attention of His Holiness Dalai Lama, who invited him to join the office of His Holiness Dalai Lama. Therefore, Yangdi Rinpoche, please deliver your speech.
First of all, greetings to all, the above, and the guests and expert. I would pay my happy greetings today. I will present on the topic of the Buddhist. A Buddhist view on emotion and behavior. In this, the term emotion is used in Tibetan called the Semyon. I just suspect if this term itself appears in Tibetan Buddhism. I feel like it was a translated letter and coined using the from the Western term. So how we need to understand this term emotion, which is translated in Tibetan? He said that the Semyon we have in Tibetan is English. In English term is emotion, and for myself, I don't know the definition itself because I don't know much of English. So compared to English, I am more comfortable with the Chinese. So when I translate this into Tibetan, not Tibetan, into Chinese, they have that comfort word. It's called Jinshu. The meaning itself is we cannot call this delusion or negative emotions. It's not the term. The term itself, the emotion, the term, the Chinese term, is just is a neutral term. It's not negative. The term that they have in Chinese, the meaning itself is without knowing the overall condition, something that appears in your mind that just judge things outside, that kind of mental projection. Based on this projection, then we decide to judge something's good or not. So that's kind of a feeling that we have. So in the Buddhism, like attachment, anger, and other things will consist in the sense of can be categorized in the term of emotion. I just base on this definition. I will tell something from the Buddhist perspective, from the Buddhist teaching. there's no equivalent or exact term for emotion. So simply by simplifying, so it's it's a kind of mental state that is considered in the ignorance. Yeah, when we don't know the term very well, it's difficult to speak on it. Basically, on the topic at the moment, based on the situation around the world, when we think about the future about the world, the future of the world depends on the behavior, ethical behavior of the current people we have on the world. So, how people will behave will definitely depend on their emotional status or their way of thinking. So it is clear that it affects our behavior or mental attitude or way of thinking or feelings. So the way that occurs is important. So generally we speak the happiness and the sadness. Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to talk about happiness or sadness based from the outer world, the objective things. So when we talk about the happiness or sadness, is depend on our view on the outer materials. So if we can have a view on that based on a neutral or some, we can use that kind of view. So sometimes people say some neutral attitude. Some people can stay neutral no matter how the outside outer material facilities are good or bad. The importance of this, importance of emotion, I will talk through a story and show you an example to express this. I will talk about the story. Yale University in the United States. A famous dean who has been the dean for 20, a famous educator. His name is Richard Levin. In a speech, he said, if in the Yale University, student from the Yale University, graduated student from the Yale University, become a professional expert. If we, it is not a failure of the education at the university. What does this mean? The highest level of education need have 3 levels or 3 points. For him, there are 3. The firstly, the first thing is someone who can control his emotion. to have the ability to control his or her emotion. That is the most important. When he talk about this, for an elephant, and someone is riding the elephant, if the man riding on the elephant is our wisdom, the elephant is our love or compassion or motivation. Also innate ability or our current situation or current condition. These are the elephant, and the person riding the elephant is our mind or wisdom. If we have a great pressure in our mind, or our mind is not mind is imbalanced or demoralized, or if during that kind, so the person or our mind that or the wisdom that ride on that sort of elephant cannot go further, just go around. If the elephant is a strong, like the emotion or motivation, or the innate ability has stable and strong and active, excited and alive, and then it becomes or like go parallel with the mind of wisdom, and it came forward. So therefore it's really important to control the emotion. So it should be one of the important things in the education system. The secondly, to distinguish the mind to distinguish the bad from good from bad. A matured ability of distinguishing bad from bad, bad from good. There's a different level of understanding or knowing. Or you study something and you know the things that is presented in the philosophy. Or for us, you know that, but for yourself, you just don't know anything. It's just like telling a story. Because you don't have the ability to distinguish from good from bad. You just follow someone's footpath, and you just don't have a distinct path that you take. At the time you don't have your own mind. You just follow other people's mind, and the ability to distinguish is another point that is considered to be important in the education at Yale. The last one is there's disturbance or struggles, so we need the ability to solve the problem. So if you cannot solve the problem, so the education that you got is wasted. In real life, to challenge the real life and to face and overcome challenges is another important. And so the people need the experience in real life. Even if our situation seems so simple, but it's complicated. The way you relate with other, or the way we communicate with each other is complicated. in this situation, since this is a complicated condition, so it's important for us to face and solve the problems or challenges. So in that sense, in that sense, is related to the things that we study and how we can put in which level in these three levels. And at the main point that I want to talk is, as I've mentioned, the negative emotion or the delusion that we have is very widely discussed in Buddhist philosophy. Is because the framework in Buddhist is the for truth is the true cause and relation in this realm. The cause, the negative emotions or the delusions, afflictions are mainly discussed in this in the Buddhist philosophy. This the afflictions that we discussed in Tibetan Buddhism, if we consider this is equivalent with that or the same as the emotion, how we are this discussed, or how are this categorized, this is very detailed in Buddhist philosophy. For instance, attachment, or the disadvantage of attachment was temporary, and the long run disadvantages are discussed. Afflictions like attachment, how are arised, or the 6 courses, or for different afflictions, there are the identities or natures are also discussed. This detail discussed in the Buddhist or low level as the high level in Buddhist philosophical text. And so these are the things that we need to settle or calm down. So we will talk about the antidote. Antidote are expressed, and then how we use this antidote to calm the negative emotion for afflictions that are discussed. It's really difficult to talk all about this, but I will just take an example from one or two. So you can generalize, or you can just generalize to think about this. Once when you have some kind of challenges, how you can face or overcome the challenges. For example, like affliction. Self-criticize, or also the selfish attitude, selflessness, self-doubt. Discouragement. Once you're discouraged, so the causes and the challenge, the way to overcome that. So for discouragement is so when you see yourself don't have have the ability to do anything. So when you think about all the problems that you can have, so that another cause of discouragement or depression. Or mental ability, you have low or like bad mental power, or your and another cause is your wisdom is not clear or not sharp. These are the cause. When you're discouraged, discouraged meaning you see you have all the conditions. So that the property or nature of discouragement, so you're intimidated and you have feeling that you cannot do anything, or I cannot do anything and I can achieve anything. What is the disadvantage of discouragement? So with that, with the discouragement, we cannot do anything for temporary purpose or long-term purpose. So as the discouragement or depression increases, we will have other mental disabilities as well. So the antidote for discouragement is so we have a lot of antidote to improve to get out of this encouragement. When you think that you cannot, when you think about a goal that you cannot achieve anything, so at this time you have think about the human life, and you are born as a human. You have a mind, and that you have the mental ability. And also there are also those who have achieved those good success in their life. Previously they are like us, so they have go through the steps to achieve or great success. So we can go over there by thinking about the goal that we had done. So the method, other one is also you can use the method. Think about the method to, if you are discouraged, you think about, there's so many methods and I cannot do anything. Then in this situation you have other antidote. When we have a lot of method, we cannot use all the method all together. So first we need to attend for smaller 1 or 2%, and then we can increase to 5, 10. So we can go upward. The difficulty depend on the habituation. If you are habituated, it become a habit. Then it's become easier. Sometimes we say when I go do that is really difficult. So it's really, if you don't do anything, it's more difficult. So you are discouraged because of the method. So these are some of the antidote. Generally, if you do anything, there's no difficulty levels on the work itself. It's dependent on the person or the people who is doing that kind of job. For example, Sometimes some people cannot do even 100 years. Some other people can do like a day or two. So it depends on the ability of the person, not on the things or the work that we are going to do. So on the work itself, it doesn't have a difficulty levels. So also we talk about this time is a really a bad time. Bad things are going on. So during the good times we could do this, but this time is really bad. I cannot do anything. And even this sense we can, even if this situation or condition is bad, we can turn that into good situation or a good opportunity for us to improve. It's a good opportunity for us to show our ability or to concentrate more, to show our ability to help. It's a good opportunity to improve. You can turn that bad situation into a good opportunity or helper to succeed. If you're in a good if in that way, if you're in a bad situation or environment, you can turn that into a good opportunity or to this is shown in one of the part to talk about the effort. So in this sense, we can use our effort. This is about in the case of discouragement. So other things like selfishness and other stuff. So one of the mentioned that like if there's 10 and 100 difficulties, I have 100 antidote and method to challenge that, and then we need to think in this way to generalize a method to face the challenges of negative or these afflictions. Secondly, for the moral behaviors in the Tibetan Buddhism, non-violent in the Tibetan Buddhism, to respect others' life as your life, and also have or to carry attitude to others' life as our own life. So there's no option for us because we need to live together. Furthermore, also our future depends on other people. Also our things are dependent on others. Because of others, we can live. That's why the thinking because we need to live interdependently. So we need to respect and care for others' life. Because we need to, there's no option, and we need to live together. So it's better to think to behave well, and not harming others. On a little higher level, also thinking, caring or respect others' life, to do good for others. So when we think about that, it doesn't mean that you need to accept whatever other people just behave badly. So in that case, you need to challenge others' behavior, and challenge behavior using a appropriate method, and meanwhile you need to respect other people. Yes, a brief comment on ethical behavior is like this.
Yangtze Rinpoche, for your wonderful talk, and as you know, listening your talk, I felt I wanted to keep just listening your talk, but since we need to move on this session, I had to moderate, and because of that, I had to remind him for the time the limited time, and the Yangtze Rinpoche really not just talking. He did not very much. He did not talk much about on the philosophical abstracts. He really touched on the practical sort of the elements of how to handle emotions, and giving very specific examples, and therefore I think his talk truly very much beneficial for me. I assume it is surely beneficial to all of you. And now we have a second presenter, Robin Nashlock. To introduce Robin Nashlock, my mentor and a very good friend and like a brother. Robin Nashlock is an associate professor of psychology at Northwestern University, where he also holds appointments in the neurology, neurobiological and psychiatry. He is the director of the Afflictive and Clinical Neuroscience Laboratory and director of the Cells to the Society and the Center on the Social Disparities and Health at Northwestern University. Northwestern. His research examines how the brain creates emotion and how the brain and body are affected by stress and adversity. He also examines the brain system that help protect people from stress and the extent to which these profile of resilience can be strengthened through the intervention and meditation. He is a co-member of Emory Tibetan Science Initiative team overseeing training and research methodology for the monastic science students. May I request Professor Robin, please, to deliver your speech.
Sure. Thank you, Sangpala. Dear friend. So what I want to do in this conversation is extend our discussion of emotion in the prior session to the topic of ethics. And I first want to say thank you, Rinpoche, for a wonderful, wonderful talk. And I appreciate the perspective of very practical advice on how to manage emotions. I'm going to start at a broader philosophical level. And I'm actually going to start with a more Greek and European philosophical perspective to set the stage for some of the comments that I wish to make. And this is the work of Plato. And in Plato's allegory of the chariot, he proposes a model of ethics and morality that prioritizes reason and analytic thought, and actually says that emotion should be subserved and controlled, and that emotion is actually somewhat negative, and that emotions are to be discarded, and that rational thought and analytic thought is what should drive moral behavior. Countering Plato's perspective is an Aristotelian perspective that focuses more on well-being, practical advice, and actually says that emotion play a very valuable role in generating moral behavior. And in a sense, Aristotle is considered the first psychologist because he was interested in the nature of emotion. And this debate between Plato and Aristotle defines much of kind of Greek and European philosophy in terms of the tension between emotion and rationality, between dualistic models of mind or interested in the nature of the world as it is. And so what I'd like to do in this conversation today is highlight from my very naive perspective, so please be gentle if I'm mistaken, of how Buddhism in a way integrates the best of Plato and Aristotle and highlights the value of both analytic perspectives and emotional perspectives in generating compassion, that there's a value placed on both logic and on emotion, and that the confluence of those two is where something really magical can happen. And so I'll return to my roadmap of the brain, my heuristic that I talked about last time. You all should know a little bit about the prefrontal cortex, a little bit about the amygdala, and a little bit about the ventral striatum. And I'm going to link each of these brain systems to different components of moral behavior, and actually suggest that different components of moral behavior involve different brain systems. A major thesis of my presentation today is very against the Plato's perspective. And I'm going to argue that emotions are not a luxury, but are actually foundational to our rational behavior and our ethical behavior. Antonio Damasio has done beautiful research in which people have damage to emotional brain systems. And what he finds is that those emotional brain systems, when damaged, actually lead to very immoral and irrational behavior, suggesting that emotional brain systems are foundational to morality. They're not a luxury, and contrary to Plato's perspective, they should not be discarded. And I'm just going to pause. Can you hear me? Is this okay? Okay. The second proposal that I'll make, the second thesis, is that it's not as simple as just emotion or just rationality, but that both emotion and and logic, or analytics, I should say, are foundational to morality, and that those different constituent parts of morality are mediated by different brain systems. So I'm going to start with a parable, and this is the parable first proposed by Garrett Hardin and really nicely adapted by Joshua Green, and it's called The Tragedy of the Commons in kind of philosophy. And the idea in The Tragedy of the Commons is you have this parable where you have a bunch of herders, and each herder has their own respective numbers of animals. And it would make sense for each herder to have their own animals eat as much of the grass as possible, as much of the food as possible. That would be very good for them from a selfish perspective. But that eventually what would happen is if each herder acted selfishly and did not act cooperatively, you'd be in a situation where you would lose the kind of value of cooperative behavior, and the selfishness would actually self-destruct the limited amount of resources, and now you'd be in a situation in which the herders were no longer in a positive position because their selfish behavior caused them to consume all of the resources, and that they would have no resources available. And so theorists and philosophers, and Josh Green has proposed that we over time have developed brain systems and psychological processes that have facilitated cooperative behavior, and that this within-group cooperation is actually driven often by very emotional processes. You feel people's pain in your group. You feel people's emotions. You've kind of developed a sense of empathy. We've talked about the amygdala as being really central to fear and salience processing and vigilance. Another brain system that will make a kind of a presentation today is the insula. Now, when you think of your emotions, you often think of having emotions in your body. Emotions are often a somatic experience. You feel emotions, you don't think emotions. And there's growing evidence that the insula is really the heart of that feeling state in the body. The insula has a viscerotopic map in it, meaning it actually has a map of our guts and our viscera. And so we feel in our viscera, we feel in our belly. When people say I have butterflies in our belly, the insula is really critical to this. It's critical for both positive feelings and negative feelings. It's a visceral feeling. And researchers have suggested that the insula plays a very critical role in morality and ethical behavior, because when you are feeling you don't want to hurt another person, it's kind of a feeling in your body. It hurts. It's not something that you actually want to do. And so these kind of very fast, very old, very ancient emotional brain systems appear to play a very important role in a lot of moral behavior, particularly moral behavior that evolved to solve within group, within tribe, within species cooperation. The alternative parable that I'll provide is what is sometimes called the tragedy of common sense morality. So the tragedy of common sense morality says, okay, we don't just all exist in our own little tribe or our own little group, that we actually exist in coexistence with other tribes and with other groups. And, you know, that may be very easy to do if there are geographical boundaries like a forest between two groups. But eventually what might happen is life might happen, and all of a sudden, two groups that typically were just not having to interact now are forced to actually interact. And from this perspective, we didn't necessarily develop these emotional brain systems to facilitate moral behavior within groups. And in many respects, our kind of emotions may drive bad moral behavior across different groups. But this perspective proposed by Josh Green suggests that we actually have, in addition to the capacity to experience emotional moral systems, we have logical systems that are slower, that are more deliberative, that are more able to think through complex cost analyses. And part of living as multiple groups in this particular situation requires not just having emotions as the driver of our moral behavior, but also analytic processes that are driven more by prefrontal processes. And so this suggests a dual model or a dual mode of morality, that we have multiple moral systems. We have moral systems that evolved that are emotion-based to facilitate within kind of group cooperative behavior. But we also have slower moral systems that evolve to kind of navigate more complex dynamics that require analytic behavior. And what I would propose is that we actually can map these different modes of morality onto brain systems. Emotional brain systems being fast, feeling states. You feel another person's pain and you don't want to hurt them. Analytic-based ethics being slower, more deliberative, more logical and analytical, that actually requires thinking through complex cost-benefit analyses for, you know, the situation at hand. And what I would suggest here is that these different brain systems in the context of ethics evolve to solve different types of challenges. This is not the first proposal of this. Franz de Waal at Emory University has done wonderful work suggesting that we have multiple models of morality in our brains, emotional models and perspective-taking models, and he's done wonderful writings on this. And so what this suggests is that if we have multiple moral systems, we can actually enhance and engage these moral systems to optimize cooperative, compassionate, and ethical behavior. It's important to pause here that this is not a non-natural exercise. There's a lot of research to suggest that we have this innate moral system and that this innate cooperative hardware in our minds and brains that evolved to solve complex ethical challenges can actually be enhanced to promote a better world. And I think I pull on the research of the fact that you see very altruistic behavior in children, that there is this kind of innate foundational, compassionate, ethical foundation in children, as well as our cousins in chimpanzees. What's also intriguing, this is the work of David Rand and Martin Nowak and Josh Green have done this work, suggesting that the faster a person makes a cooperative or altruistic behavior, often the more cooperative they are. Again, suggesting that there is a kind of an innate cooperative sense in ourselves that we can use and amplify to enhance cooperative and altruistic behavior. And so for the second half of my talk, I'd like to say, okay, having established the possibility that there's dual modes of morality, that different brain systems have evolved to navigate these different modes of morality, what can we do to promote optimal behavior, optimal societies, and optimal compassionate behavior? And here I draw on the work of Peter Singer. I think Peter Singer is entering the room through the rain. He's hearing this talk, and he's here. And what Peter Singer suggests is that we evolve these moral systems in our brains to solve old evolutionary challenges, but that we now have an obligation to go beyond evolutionary struggle and take those old systems in our brain that evolve for cooperation and use them in the good of compassion and service and expand the circle, so that we take the circle of our in-group and we expand it so that, according to Peter Singer and others, that eventually the in-group becomes all people, and there is no out-group. And when I think of the teachings of His Holiness, I think of this concept of expanding the circle, so that eventually the circle is expanded such that there is no out-group, everyone is a part of the in-group, and it makes me again think of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And so what I would suggest is that we evolve these old evolutionary emotional brain systems for compassion and ethics within our group, but that we now have the invitation to engage analytic processes and emotional processes to expand the circle. I loved Geshe-la's comments earlier in the last session about empathy, and I just want to take a moment to discuss how we can actually translate empathy into compassion. So what I would suggest, that empathy may be necessary for compassion, but it's not necessarily sufficient. So if you think about empathy, empathy is really about feeling another person's pain. You feel another person's pain. There's a sense of you kind of connect with their struggles. And what's interesting from a neuroscience perspective is that empathy actually activates and engages the pain matrix in our brain. We feel another person's pain, and we don't just feel it intellectually, we feel it emotionally. We actually engage our own pain matrix. The insula is the part of the pain matrix. Another component of empathy, though, is the analytic component of empathy. So where empathy is not simply a feeling state, it's also an analytic state, which it involves the ability of a perspective taking, that you can actually think about what it's like to be in another person's shoes. Or the temporal parietal junction in the brain is associated with theory of mind. You can actually imagine what it's like to be another person. And so that we have these constituent parts of empathy that are emotional, we have these constituent parts of empathy that are analytic. But when Geshe Lobsang was asked, what do we do moving forward? He said that what's missing often in empathy is warm-heartedness. And so I would suggest that that absolutely is true, that the warm-heartedness is what's really critical, that we can take the constituent parts of empathy, of feeling another person's pain, of being able to perceive another person's situation, and add into that equation an emotional kind of component of warm-heartedness, loving kindness, and compassion. And again, not to reduce this to a particular brain region, but as I'll discuss in a moment, there's interesting research to suggest that our good old friend, the ventral striatum, may be relevant for this conversation. So Tanya Singer's done some beautiful work in which she showed that when people transition from an empathic state to a compassionate state, their brains transition from an insular state to a ventral striatal state. So to put that differently, what's happening is a person is switching from empathy of I feel your pain to a compassionate state of I'm activated and motivated and warm-heartedly engaged to help fix your pain. And there's actually a fair amount of research to suggest that empathy can be a suboptimal state. A lot of people who are in states of high empathy become empathically frozen. They have difficulty actually taking action because the motivation more is about reducing their own pain as it is about reducing the other person's pain, because they're feeling the other person's pain in this strong way. And so just to kind of put this more simple, graphically in a simple way, what I think the suggestion here is that you can actually take the constituent parts of empathy, translate that into warm-hearted action, and then that can translate into compassionate behavior. So I return to this study that I presented in the last conversation to make the point that you can integrate both emotional brain systems and analytic brain systems to promote this compassionate behavior. So Helen Wang did this, again, beautiful study, 2-week compassion program. And again, as I mentioned, she found that compassion increased this area of the brain, the ventral striatum, which is associated with emotion. But here I want to highlight the fact that the increase in positive emotion and warm-heartedness in the ventral striatum was driven in part through functional connections to the prefrontal cortex. So there was this synergy between emotion and logic, between emotion and analytics. And one of the things that I've been so impressed about in learning Indo-Tibetan Buddhism is the use of both logic and emotion to facilitate compassion. And so drawing on your teachings, I think what this suggests is that we can engage both the fast emotional and the slower analytic brain regions in ways to enhance compassion, to propose or kind of promote this whole brain ethics that really uses our whole brain systems in optimal ways. And again, I really think of analytic meditation and Tonglen meditation as being a wonderful combination of those two. Analytic meditation being thinking exercises that are designed to enhance compassion, and Tonglen being more emotional exercises where you feel people as part of your in-group and you expand the circle. So in closing, what I'd like to suggest is that emotions are not luxuries. They're foundational to moral behavior. They're foundational to ethical behavior. We have the possibility, and I would say the responsibility, to expand the circle of compassion through both emotion and analytic processes in order to engage whole brain compassion. I loved the point that Rinpoche mentioned on the importance of habit in driving these particular processes, that habit becomes the core component, that eventually these move from kind of slow, how do I do this, to very natural, intuitive processes. And part of forming habits is developing behaviors very early in childhood. And there's a lot of research to suggest that warm-hearted parenting really facilitates an innate kind of compassion and resiliency in children. This is the work of Gene Brody at the University of Georgia, where he finds that if you just facilitate compassionate behavior in parents, you see this wonderful transition to the outcomes in children. And I'd like to also return to something that was discussed in the last session about the culture of compassion. I personally have been so humbled and moved by having the privilege of interacting with your community and seeing how your community and culture leads with compassion. It's changed my perspective of human nature. And I think your tradition, your culture, for me, is such a great teaching on the value of culture as a driver of compassion and social relationships. And I have so much gratitude for the effect that you're having on my own life, but on the world. And so I just want to close by also saying that if I think of a place in the world that's promoting compassion, it's hard for me to think of a place that is doing it more than the Center for at Emory University and Geshe Lobsang, inspired by His Holiness. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Robin, for your wonderful talk, and specifically your presentation on the neurophysiological differences between empathy and then the compassion. That part is quite very intriguing. And now we are moving to the panel discussion. First, I will ask few questions to the panelists, and then we will take few questions from the audience. So first, I think by listening Yangdi Rinpoche's presentation, I think we need a little bit sort of in a clear symbol definitions of emotion, because the term emotion, we don't have that kind of equivalent term, emotion, in Tibetan Buddhist literature. And because of that, it seems there is a lot of confusion and not able to, grasping what the emotion really means, what it really meant by. Therefore, so the question is to Robin. Please, can you just simply give a little bit sort of definition what is the emotion?
Yeah, it's a strangely easy and hard question. So I teach a course called The Emotional Brain at Northwestern. And my first question that I ask the class is, what is an emotion? And usually the room is silent. Because it's hard. It's hard to define an emotion, right? Even though we feel emotions all the time, it's hard to actually define it. What I would say an emotion is it's a conscious and unconscious state that could be initiated by internal or external stimuli that causes us to kind of move towards or away from particular stimuli. So at its core, emotions are about facilitating, do I go or do I stay? And emotions are feeling states that are typically very fast, that are about, do I go or do I stay? But the one caveat that I would add to this is wonderful work by Lisa Feldman Barrett and Joseph Ledoux that suggests that maybe that's a bit of an oversimplified perspective. Maybe we have these approach withdrawal states that are designed to, facilitate go or not go behavior. But in addition to that, we represent those states in kind of higher analytic spaces. Mm-hmm. And so that the subjective experience of emotion is both the activation of these homeostatic states that cause us to lean in or lean away from stimuli, coupled with the interpretation of it in different parts of the cortex. Mm-hmm. And that it's that interpretation of it, that kind of hiccuping of those old homeostatic states up into consciousness that we might experience as emotion. And the reason why I think that's important is it suggests that we can very quickly reappraise what we might consider difficult states in different ways, just depending on our interpretation of them.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I have a question to Professor Henderson. In the Robin's presentation, he talks about the innate goodness. Innate goodness, and exhibiting innate goodness from the baby. Therefore, I think, from the scientific community, there's a little bit sort of, there is disagreement on that point, two different views. And from Buddhism, we will say all the living beings, do possess Buddha nature. And the afflictive emotions are not embedded in the nature of the consciousness. The consciousness itself is pure and luminous. And therefore, I just wanted to hear your philosophical understanding or your standpoint on this kind of, innate goodness. Are we innately good or bad, or more kind of cooperative or selfish? I just wanted to hear this point, because this is some kind of the basis of all the emotions, and if the innate is kind of negative, is naturally negative, then I wonder how that kind of naturally negativity basis can really give arise such a positivity. Flourish of the compassion and all these things. So could you just, give your, share your thoughts on this, please?
Sure. Can you tell me again how long I have?
I think I forgot to introduce you. I think I'm sorry for that.
You don't need to. Let's save time. How much time do I have?
Maybe, not more than 5 minutes, I would say. Not more than 5 minutes.
Thank you. This is an opportunity, I suppose, to be a bad boy. So I think the term nature in the context of the sciences is a fraught or difficult or problematic notion. It often supposes that there is one way that a various organism would develop. So you often think of species as having natures. At the same time, evolutionary theory suggests that there's going to be some variation within members of any species. It'll be something that has a vague boundary. It will change over time. So in that sense, the notion of nature has become a problem for many philosophers of science, biologists, and others. Then, when one tries to make some sense of it, you begin to think of certain capacities, more or less characteristic of members of a certain species, and I'm afraid also groups and things like that. So then, what are the capacities characteristic of humans? if we think humans have Buddha nature. I've always wondered about that, what exactly it meant. So I tell you a quick little story, I hope. I had the most wonderful dog in the world. I happen to like strong, stout dogs, and it was a pit bull. It was a pit bull that had been of a litter of 9, and a week later, there were 3 left living because it was raised by a mother for the first week of its life that had been abused because people had wanted to fight it, that is, use it in dog fighting. We took the pit bulls, 3 of them left out of the litter, and raised them, bottle fed them. And as we did that, day and night, we ended up with one of the most sweet and gentle-tempered dogs, although pit bulls are thought to be mean. So I think what we had was a dog with a little bit of Buddha nature, in the sense that the dog had a capacity to be loving, quite considerate, and a lot of fun, like many of the Buddhists I know. Now, at the same time, I'm happy to say we have Buddha nature and that we have a capacity to develop that, and everything that's been said here suggests that it's a capacity that I'm strongly in favor of us developing at great length. I also, though, want to recognize that we have, I guess, what you would want to call Hitler nature or Nazi nature, the NN. And that's the capacity to develop fear, anxiety, to encourage it in others. When we think of the evolutionary theory that was mentioned, Tomasello, Joe Henrich, Robert Boyd, they have done a lot of stuff with this. What we find is that what may have paid evolutionarily is our ability to cooperate and coordinate with others, but it's not clear that what actually paid in the 400,000 years of evolutionary development was the capacity to coordinate indifferently. In other words, we may have, what may have been selected for, as well as the capacity to coordinate with others in a group, that must be wrong. Is the capacity to coordinate with others in a group to be, I'm not sure the technical term, an asshole to others? And so, what I want to suggest is that we probably have Buddha nature. I hope so. I'm in favor of trying to develop it. I think we're idiots if we don't. Idiots in a gentle, right-speaking sense. At the same time, I think we have, in the sense of capacity to develop, Nazi nature. And I was given a gloss by Sangpo, who was probably trying to help me out, and I think he did, to say that Buddha nature is the thought that purified human nature, or pure human nature, is the Buddha nature. What I think is, it's better to say, instead of pure human nature, purified human nature, which is a matter of developing the capacities that constitute Buddha nature, as opposed to the capacities that constitute Nazi nature or Mara nature or something like that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Now it's so maybe fundamentally we do possess both the seeds of the negativity and the positivity, and what really matters is which one we feed the most, and which one we cultivate the most, and then through that way we can really flourish the seeds of the positivity if we kind of feed that part more and that seed more. And now I would like to ask question to Geshe Gelela. Geshe Gelela is a very good friend of mine, and he's from Loseling Monastery, and he has a background of not only Buddhism but also science. He has been studying science for more than maybe 15 years, more than 15 years. Now the question to him, to Geshe Gelela, is that Yangdi Rinpoche spoke about the different different methods or tools to handle a different sort of stress or different sort of emotional distressing kind of the triggers. I feel he did not touch much on how to handle when we experience overwhelming emotions, and when we go through our emotion is so much overwhelmed and we lose our control, and we ended up react impulsively and not able to widen the gap between the impulsivity and its kind of action. Therefore, I just wanted to hear your kind of based on your kind of the Buddhist background. Could you please share some tools and methods handling this kind of overwhelming emotions when we experience this kind of overwhelming emotions? Thank you.
Toma number samala chante shidele shweda.
Happy greetings to all. When it says emotion, also when I say emotion, when it's so excited or so happy, is also a type of emotion. For instance, you get a great success or achievement, like you win a gold medalist in Olympic. Also in the we have the negative emotions that mentioned by Rinpoche. Also the things that give us trouble is the negative emotions that to control our emotion. I think in Buddhist philosophy says the patience to accept the difficulties. As a human being or in this samsara, there is suffering. So to accept the nature that we will face suffering is. And in this sense, if you can accept there is suffering, I think we will overcome suffering. I think in the Western people have easy to feel bad about in this situation. I think it's because they cannot accept that the suffering, it is the nature of the samsara. When we have overwhelming, I think the things that the things in the Tibetan philosophy that I mentioned about, for instance, when we think about we cannot think about one. I have a thought about. It says you cannot think about two things at the same time. So when I think about example, I cannot think about at the simultaneously. I cannot think about a robin. So when we think So when you think about other things, you can divert your mind to other stuff. When you think about class or other things, so there is studies in the science that shows that if you can divert mind from the negative emotion to other things, you feel not overwhelmed by the emotion. I think it is for instance, like if you're overwhelmed, for me, if you count the mantras, I think it helps you to calm down. And secondly, to set good motivation early in the morning is important. For instance, in the monastery, we need to go for the kitchen duties. So we don't have watch and the watch. So when you go to sleep with an intention that I need to wake up by 5 to go to the kitchen to make food, usually you will wake up in the morning. So this kind of motivation, so it helps you to act or wake up on time. So therefore, it's important to have a good motivation. So when you wake up in the morning, you have a good motivation to not harm others and to help others. With that motivation, if you have this motivation, it helps you from other unexpected negative emotions. In under the sources that says the emotions. So to solve others' emotional overwhelming situations, so we need to know the emotion, or we need to feel the empathy, or to understand others' emotions. So to understand others' emotion, so in the Tibetan Buddhist says to understand others' emotions, we need to so to understand others' emotions. So similar one myself or yourself, ourselves have some kind of negative emotions. How it come in effect in your body. If you know the situations or the characteristics of such kind of negative emotion, so you can understand with your own experience, with your own experience, you can feel others' emotions. So this text is this is similar to the things that discussed in science. Firstly, you need to your emotion. In the philosophies. If you to attain some level, you need to have some sadness. So you need some sort of emotions because emotion is a basis for attaining some level of enlightenment.
Okay,
yeah, that's my answer.
For your insights and the knowledge, sharing, the tools and methods for handling overwhelming emotions. The first is kind of, the applying awareness, and then the setting in intention, and then the having a better sort of, experiential awareness of your own emotional kind of, profile or dimension, make a huge differences in terms of handling this kind of, overwhelming emotions. And I do have actually a few more questions, but now we are running out of time. Therefore, I will take, 2 more questions from the audience. And when you ask the question, please make sure which panelists are you asking, and please be very specific. The question be very specific and short and clear.
Tashtele Samlola. Good afternoon, Rimuchala Tashle. My name is Teja Samrup. I'm a language teacher at Myontula Patent School. My question is to Professor Robin. And the question is very simple and fundamental. I have two sets of questions. The first is, what is the basic difference between feelings and emotion? And the second question is, from your talk, you talked about analytic empathy and emotion-based empathy. So could you please elaborate it further? I didn't understand it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There's a phrase called affect. And affect is the umbrella term for the entire study of emotion. So my laboratory is called the Affective and Clinical Neuroscience Lab, which means that we're interested in kind of all aspects of emotion. And underneath that umbrella phrase of affect, there's three terms that are typically used. Emotion is typically considered to be very short-lived feeling responses. They're typically responses to internal thoughts or external stimuli that are very kind of short-lived, punctuated. We think of them as kind of, you know, fairly strong in the moment. Feeling states are described from a temporal perspective, which means they're longer emotions. And feeling states are often considered to be a little like not that intense, but for some people, feeling states can be very intense. So the main difference between an emotion and feeling is time. And then the third would be mood, right? So like your kind of general mood, and then you might even say your temperament, your propensities. So the main distinction between emotion and feeling is the duration and maybe a slight kind of intensity. It's artificial to carve it into emotion and feeling, but that's kind of what people have done in the field. The second part of your question was on this emotion-based empathy versus analytic-based empathy. And what I was trying to go for there was the idea that empathy has multiple ingredients. Complex emotional states like empathy and compassion often have multiple ingredients. The emotional component of empathy is I feel your pain. So I have an empathic response to you if you are in pain. I feel with you. There's a synergy or a synchronization in our brains. I'm kind of picking up what you're feeling and I'm feeling it myself. And that's really a core component of empathy, right? And that is really good. You want to feel other people's pain. That's part of being a sophisticated person in relationships and in society. The analytic component is a more cognitive aspect, which is that you're able to actually see yourself in the person's situation. You're able to have what's called theory of mind, which is that you can literally imagine yourself cognitively in that person's life circumstance. And so empathy from that perspective involves both a feeling state, which is I feel your experience, and a cognitive state, which is that I can actually imagine being in it cognitively. And what I'm suggesting is that a third variable that we can add to the equation is warm-heartedness, which is kind of the compassion component. Wonderful question.
And one more question. Okay, please.
My name is Tenzin Pema, and I'm from TCV School, Salikri. So my question is for Dr. Robin. So as you have said earlier about one feeling sympathy and compassion towards others, I wanted to ask, when one develops a deep installed hatred to someone, how can that certain someone practicing compassion subdue that emotion?
What's just the last sentence you said? How can one?
How can one practicing compassion subdue that emotion?
Yeah.
Thank
no,
you.
It's a great question. You know, I think we all have some life experiences that are very painful, right? And in some respects, having really strong aversive or afflictive emotions around a person might be a very normal response if somebody has been hurt by somebody or has a feeling of really been traumatized by somebody. And so I think the first thing I would say is be gentle on yourself if you have a strong feeling of negative emotion for another person. and recognize that that may be just a part of healing and kind of coming to terms with that situation. And that may take some time to kind of grieve the loss of what happened or why you feel that emotion. And I think there can be a lot of self-aggression when somebody feels like they need to just switch an emotion and not let themselves have a normal or typical grieving state. But I mean, I think what these teachings are offering is the capacity to go beyond just self-healing and actually going into more of a compassionate state. And there's people in the room who are so much wiser than I am to answer this question. But I'll pull on the practice of Tonglen, which is this wonderful meditation practice where you start to work on really feeling compassion. And, in Tonglen practice, the first person you give compassion to is yourself. And then you start to focus on giving compassion and loving kindness to a person that you really care for. And then you start to work on giving loving compassion to a person that you're kind of neutral towards. And it's only after you've done some of the foundational work that you start to really do the practice of giving compassion to somebody who maybe has hurt you. So I guess my answer is compassion is a journey. Start with yourself, expand the circle, and eventually you'll have an advanced teaching of trying to give that to a person who's hurt you, recognizing that that person also has been hurt in their life, and that may have caused them to hurt you.
So we have one more question, the last question from the student.
Hello, everyone. My question is toward Mr. Robin. I don't know if you have ever heard about this condition, but few of my classmates seem to suffer from a condition which is caused by emotions, as the nurses suggest. But they seem to be in unbearable pain, like they can't breathe properly, their limbs and fingers curl up.
Can you repeat the question, because Professor Robbins is saying that he didn't hear you clear.
Oh, okay. My question is toward Mr. Robin. I don't know if you have ever heard about this condition, but few of my classmates seem to suffer from this condition, which is caused by emotions, as our nurses suggest. But they seem to be in unbearable pain, like they can't breathe properly, their limbs and fingers curl up, their body temperature drops quickly. They have also went on to many hospitals, and all they get is that they have no disease and so on. So my question is, can emotions really trigger such things?
Yeah,
Thank
wow,
you.
such a great question. So, my sense of what you're talking about is what one might call a panic attack. And panic attacks are these feelings where a person's really overwhelmed by their own physiology, and they start to really kind of say that things are going to be terrible, and that just throws gasoline on the fire, and they really feel their heart starting to race, shortness of breath, fingers tingling, and they feel very paralyzed by that. What's really hard for people with panic attacks is they often come out of the blue in very unpredictable ways, and as a result, some people will be afraid of leaving their own homes because they're afraid of having panic attacks. So this experience that you're describing can be very, very hard and a lot of suffering for a person. There are really well-established therapies, behavioral therapies, to help people manage panic attacks. A lot of them draw from the mindfulness tradition and in the Buddhist tradition. But what it's fundamentally about is it's learning to do a few simple things in those moments of panic. The first is learning to slow down your stress physiology, right? I talked about that sympathetic nervous system, and it's kind of activating heart race and shortness of breath and kind of this stress physiology of sweaty palms. And that's absolutely a normative response in a stressful situation, but kind of learning how to calm that down physiologically through breathing techniques, through getting support from people in that moment. And there's techniques that help people kind of quiet the physiology, deep breathing, circular breathing, kind of quieting down the sympathetic nervous system is really important. A second component of it is more analytic. So there's this kind of theme of both emotion and analytic. The second component is starting to challenge the thoughts that this is the end of the world, that the world is ending, that you're not going to make it, that you're going to die, which is often what people experience in these states of panic attacks, and actually start to bring an analytic component to it where you challenge the thoughts and you say, I'm probably not going to die, this has happened before, I've made it through this experience in the past, and really working on the cognitive component to it. So my advice for somebody who's struggling with this is, one, get some help, because there's a lot of really great therapeutics out there. And what that help will help you do is learn to kind of manage the stress physiology in your body, and then also kind of challenge the thoughts that you think the world is ending at that point in time. And that's been shown to be a very effective set of therapeutics for people who are suffering from panic attack. But really great question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yangdi Rinpoche, for giving such an insightful presentation from the Buddhist perspective. And then Robin Ashlak for your amazing presentations from the neuroscience perspective. And then the two panelists, Professor David Henderson and Geshe Gele Gyazola. I think this panel discussion has been very productive and very informative. At the same time, we have learned so much practical kind of instructions tool to apply in our day-to-day kind of challenges. And therefore, I want to deeply and sincerely thank you all, and thank you so much all the participants, and have a good evening, good night, and have a good rest. Thank you so much.